Hello, welcome to the video on what is a literature review. So the first question one needs to ask is, what does a literature review mean and who conducts it? A literature review is the evaluation of pieces of work by somebody else, and that piece of work could be a government report, a journal article, a series of books, etc. The literature should be related to your research topic for it to actually be effective. When one conducts a literature review, it should lead logically to the research question. Now, one might ask, if you're doing the strategic commercialization plan, is a literature review relevant for me? And I have to say, yes, it is. Because you need to identify, is there a gap in the market for your product idea? Is there growth opportunities for your business over the next 2 years? And to actually substantiate your argument for your idea or for your growth, you should actually be reviewing the literature, and that literature would be maybe in the form of government FORFOSS reports, or even a report such as this one, which was recently produced by the Entrepreneurship Forum. So that's what a literature review is, and for either the thesis or the strategic commercialization plan, yes, you will be conducting it. Also, in the thesis, you will have chapters or a chapter dedicated to a literature review. However, in the strategic commercialization plan, you will not have a section dedicated to a literature review. The review will be interspersed throughout the content of the strategic commercialization plan. That's the significant difference between the thesis and the strategic commercialization plan. So what makes for a good and a bad review? Well, let's look at the positives. What I'd like you to do is have a synthesis of the research, not just a clear annotated bibliography. And it's a critical evaluation of the literature, comparing and contrasting authors who have very varying opinions on the topic under discussion. A poor literature review is confined to just describing and doesn't, in a sense, have the critical evaluation conducted. A good literature review has the appropriate breadth and depth. Now, for a master's thesis, if you have some depth of evaluation conducted, that is a very good literature review. However, what is a poor literature review is one that is narrow and shallow. If it's confined to only 1 or 2 articles, when the supervisor or even the student themselves knows there are many more publications out there. That's the narrowness of it. A good review has clarity and conciseness, but also uses rigorous and consistent methods. A poor one is confusing, long-winded, no structure. It doesn't have a natural flow to it. So when you're conducting your literature review and when you're writing up your literature review, always keep those positive points in mind for a literature review. One may question, why do we actually conduct a literature review? Well, it's at the front end of a thesis, or even at the front end of your strategic commercialization plan, showing the validity of the idea, showing the viability of the business idea. So it should be at the front end. And it's basically providing background to the study, maybe for the thesis, or, as I mentioned, the validity and viability of the commercialization plan. In your research, you should actually be providing the findings from other researchers that are relevant to your research topic. Could be providing a theoretical background, or a rationale and or relevance of the current study. So one may ask, is it important to look at entrepreneurship? Are there many entrepreneurs in Ireland? Well, here I would go to the GEM reports for either your thesis or your strategic commercialisation plan, showing the growth and importance of entrepreneurship. Or maybe your business idea is providing a service to entrepreneurs, and the GEM reports can show the emergence of entrepreneurs on a year-by-year basis. The other purposes of a literature review is, as you can see, quite extensive here. Looking at what has been done, but then identifying what has not been done and what your thesis is hopefully contributing. Discussing and discovering important variables relevant to the topic, such as you might be performing a demographic analysis of the Irish population for your strategic commercialisation plan, and showing that the emergence of a certain age category as a result of population growth, showing the development of your market. It could be to synthesize and gain a new perspective. Maybe a study on an American market was conducted, and now you're wanting to replicate that in the Irish context. For both the strategic commercialisation plan and also the thesis, you could be understanding the structure of the subject, explaining maybe your unit of analysis or your market in more detail. Nicely for both the thesis and the strategic commercialisation plan is this last point on the purpose of a literature review, placing the research in a historical context to show familiarity with state-of-the-art development. So what should the review actually do? And when you're thinking about your literature review and writing up points of interest for your strategic commercialisation plan, consider these points. Compare and contrast different authors' views, group authors who draw similar conclusions. It could be a number of government reports showing the importance of providing microfinance to small businesses, and then showing the gap that exists in the market that your commercialisation plan is going to target and show the growth of. Highlight gaps, highlight exemplary studies, show how your study relates to the literature in general, and conclude by summarising what the literature says. So very much the next couple of slides are related to the thesis, but also for the strategic commercialisation plan. Look at the points that I reflect on here and see how it can be modified and adopted for your plan. So the structure of the literature review. The first point is crucial. You need to structure the content into groups, into subheadings, so as to group together and compare and contrast the varying opinions of different writers on certain topics. Remember, the positive points about a good literature review was synthesizing and critically analysing. So you don't just describe what one writer says and then move on to saying what the next writer says. No, you're comparing and contrasting within that heading of your literature. So the structure should be dictated instead by topic areas, conversational issues, or by questions to which there are varying approaches and theories. And then in each of the sections, discuss what the different literature argues, and then always relating back to your own research question, explaining then that you have identified a gap or a study that was done abroad that hasn't been replicated in Ireland, and this is the purpose behind your own study. Linking also is quite important within the presentation of your literature review. And I've presented here some words to help to link within your discussion. Using the words like in addition, also, again. Also, if there's disagreement between authors, of which shows a very good literature review, you could present the argument of one author and then use a linking word such as however, on the other hand, conversely, nevertheless. So you have 4 or 5 linking words there. Use them interchangeably. And then at the end of the review, include a summary of what the literature implies, which then can link to your hypothesis, if you have a hypothesis posed, or your main question. So how to review? Search the literature and search current literature. Try and keep the literature in the noughties, in those from 2000 onwards. However, you might be saying the likes of Miles and Snow, who wrote the seminal articles on strategy, let's say, in 1978. You might want to present that seminal piece and then show how other authors have used that piece of research, but it's still current today. Analytical reading and evaluative reading of papers. The Writing Centre on campus should be able to give you guidance on this. But basically, again, think about comparing, contrasting, analysing similar arguments and analysing different arguments. When you're reviewing, you need to consider the organising of the content. What is the structure and flow of that review? But also you need to write. And I would be encouraging you to write from the very beginning and then populate the relevant sections by content as you actually come along to the subject. So what is involved in searching the literature? Well, first of all, you need to question why search the literature. One reason is to avoid reinventing the wheel. If somebody else has research conducted, which is similar to your own study, absolutely take what they have identified and modify and adapt it for your own study. And it does help save time, save effort, and save you duplicating research that has already been done. Searching the literature also enables you to learn about the work of others and then have an interpretation of what they have said. So what are the steps involved in searching the literature? There are 5 steps I'm going to explain to you. The first step is, first of all, you need to identify the concepts that comprise your topic. For example, if I'm researching an area of entrepreneurship and individuals' attitudes, behaviours, characteristics, I would actually identify the concepts as entrepreneurship personality and entrepreneurship characteristics, traits, etc. And now we need to break that down even further and identify terms which are related or similar to the concept, such as personality behaviour, locus of control, need for achievement, type A behaviour. So now we're breaking down our concepts into its individual components. The third step is to consider, well, what time frame are we actually going to look at? Are we more interested in the historical development of the entrepreneurship personality and characteristic theory? If so, you go back as far as you want. Or do we want to say, well, what is it today? What are the current studies? What is the current literature? And that's where you should look at the 2000 onwards research. And where do we look for the information? I've mentioned, in class before about the caliber and quality of research. Obviously, the best would be the top-tiered journals, which are the likes of Harvard Business Review, Journal of Small Business Venturing, Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice. In the area of family business, it would be the Family Business Review. So we use databases to try and identify the key journals. Again, your supervisor should assist you on identifying what journals are of interest and are of benefit to your study. And then now we go and we relate back to the terms that we have identified that break down our concepts. So the terms identified in point 2, and now we look for those terms in the literature within the time frame. And then you complete the process again and again and again and try to delineate the relevant information from that which is not relevant. So actually, how do we do that? How do we know what is good and what isn't? So it's reading and analysing the literature. So the following process could actually be practiced. And the first one is read the abstract. The abstract is normally at the very beginning of the journal article, between maybe 200 and 500 words, no longer than that, and will normally have keywords associated with the abstract. When it takes about 90 seconds to read an abstract and know then what are the key concepts, you have obviously then got experience in reading and analysing the literature. So this is your first starting point and the first practice point of skimming through the abstract. And you should be able to know what the story is in terms of what are they researching, what is the question, how do they gather the data, and then what is the key outcome of the paper. That's what the abstract should do. Then in the article, skim through each major section of the paper. Major sections are the literature review, the methodology, the research results, and the conclusions. And then zoom into important sentences of each major section. And the important sentences would be the key findings or an interesting debate and discussion. So try to highlight maybe some key words that you would expect to see in the literature. Whilst you're reading the sections, make notes. Make short, brief notes about the introduction. What is it actually trying to do? What are the key papers identified in this paper? Point 4 is to return to those parts of the paper which are more important to your research objectives or for what you are trying to get clarification on. Then jot down any questions you have about the study which are not reported in the paper. Making notes is an essential part of this whole process. Why? Because it reduces the demands on your memory and you have a reference point for coming back to your literature and knowing which article is important for certain sections of your paper. Just some other short tips on reading. Survey all headings and subheadings first, so you know what the flow of the paper is like. Skim to get the outline of content and structure. Use a marker, use a red pen to highlight the key ideas that you have found in the literature. Jot down, write as you read. Skim through each section. Don't go from the very first word and wanting to read every single word in that paper. Some of these papers can be 7,000 words. And reading 7,000 words and trying to understand the whole thing is not necessarily the objective. Reading for those long stretches actually is not very productive. Short skim reading is more productive than long in-depth reading. So, evaluating the literature, you need to ask yourself a number of questions whilst you're reading the sections. And the next couple of slides actually pose some questions that I want you to think about whilst you're evaluating the literature. In the introduction, to know whether or not it's a worthwhile article, it should always have some element of background to the study, identification of the aims and hypotheses or objectives, and definitions should be clearly stated. And this should be helping you to formulate your own introduction to your thesis or to your plan. In the method, to verify the strength of this paper, it should have a sound design. You should know and understand the whole design of the study as a result of what they have written. Consider the sample size. If the paper is based on one person and that one person only answered the questionnaire, that is not really an appropriate sample size for a quantitative study. You should be asking yourself questions about how valid and reliable are the tools for gathering the data. And what about the results? Are the results clearly presented? Do you know as a reader what the outcome of the study are? To what extent do the results reflect back to your research question? And in the discussion, are interpretations of the finding logically correct? Are the generalizations appropriate? Are limitations of the methods used considered? Is there any conflict of interest? So when you're even considering writing your literature review, have those questions in mind for your introduction, for the method, for the results, and for the discussion section. When you're doing a literature review, the aim should be to extract key points by comparing and contrasting across studies, instead of reading one paper after the other. So you should have 3 or 4 papers open at the same time. And you should be looking at comparing and contrasting the methods that they have used for a similar study that has been conducted across those 3 papers. So when you're comparing and contrasting across studies, look at these points of the differences in the research aims and hypotheses, the research design and sampling, how the data was analysed, how the results across the different studies were presented. So there are actual diverse ways of doing this depending on your preferred mode of thinking. For example, use tables. Have the authors listed down and then the criteria across the x-axis of which you're comparing and contrasting across. Maybe doing notes, maybe spider maps, maybe mind maps, whatever is appropriate for you. So the latter half of this presentation on writing a literature review is getting you to constantly think about questions to ask whilst you're comparing across studies. So what is the specific thesis, problem or research question that your literature review helps to define? Consider what type of literature review you're conducting. Are you looking at Wikipedia, blogs? Are you looking at theses? Are you looking at journal articles? Are you trying to look at quantitative studies and comparing quantitative studies against each other, or comparing and contrasting qualitative studies? What types of publications are you using? Are you using good qualitative results or good quantitative studies? What discipline are you working in? You should be looking and comparing and contrasting across similar disciplines. How good was your information search? Have you critically analysed the data and the information that you have used? Don't just list and summarise. Go into critically appraising and evaluating the literature that you have actually identified. Have you cited and discussed studies contrary to your own perspective? Will the reader find the literature relevant, appropriate and useful? The next 3 slides are the final 3 slides, and these slides are in relation to asking questions about a book or article that you may include in your thesis or your commercialization plan. And again, consider these questions whilst you're reviewing the literature. Always consider this last question about the book or article or web page or blog or whatever you are reviewing. How does it relate to your specific thesis or question that you are developing? If it does not relate to your question or to your thesis, put that book and article aside and take it up during your summer holidays when you're sitting on the beach with a cocktail. I hope this video has been useful to you in understanding how to write a literature review. Thank you.